From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi, welcome to the show. So, if you got that series of emails this week from something called DNA Info, you can relax. It wasn't a notification that you've finally been recognized as a distant cousin of Barack Obama, or that your pesky paternity issues are coming back at you. No, it's the weird name for Joe Ricketts' new organization for local, hyper-local news, and it's off to a pretty good start here in Chicago. We'll probably talk about that a little bit on the show today. And it's been a pretty good week for Barbara Byrd-Bennett, the new school CEO, because she got approval in the Illinois House for her plan that would delay school closings, you know about this, a couple of months, and then they would issue a 5-year moratorium on further school closings. Oh, and Mayor Emanuel clarified that actually this was all his idea, so he must like the idea. The CTA has a new, whatever you want to call it, a fare structure or a reduction in certain discounts. And if you're accustomed to watching us on your iPad as you breeze along Lincoln Avenue on the number 11, there are going to be some changes in store for you in that bus. So that's just the beginning. We got a lot happening this weekend. Here to help us with all of these conversations is Fernando Diaz, who's joining us again. It's been a while since you've been here, Fernando.
Too long.
Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
From OI newspaper, and we'll be talking about all your other things that you're doing. We're also joined once again by Rebecca Harris from Catalyst.
Thanks
Great
for
to
having
have
me
you
on the
back.
show.
And for the first time, Alex Keefe is with WBEZ, Chicago Public Media. Glad to have you on the show. In fact, maybe we should just start with you because the story that that has the gift that keeps on giving, as you've said, is Jesse Jackson Jr.'s seat. We have several people who have been anointed who are going to be the next congressman, if only the people go along with that.
Yeah, it kind of depends on which columnist you read, on which day. I mean, the other day we had Michael Sneed from the Sun-Times coming out saying that Napoleon Harris, who's a state lawmaker, he's a former NFL football player, was sort of going to be the guy. And then they have this.
How did she know that, by the way? She was so affirmative about it.
I think she had her Michael Sneed sources, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then today I read in Capitol Facts they've had a Democratic Party slating session set for the middle of next month. And Rich Miller was reporting that Donnie Trotter, State Senator Johnny Trotter, was close to winning enough votes thanks to the fact that he's got this Thornton Township supervisor guy in his camp. So, but every day it seems, I went to Twitter the other day and just started asking who is not running for this seat because every day it seems like somebody else is. Yesterday was Mel Reynolds, which was just surprising. I mean, I hadn't when I initially read that I didn't quite believe. I didn't know if he was going to run. I didn't call him to ask, and then suddenly there was this press conference.
And there's a press conference
with these red and white signs that say redemption right behind him. So
he's been redeemed.
Well, or he's looking to be redeemed again. So it's. I have no idea who's going to be next in this race. I think it's the December 15th is going to be really important because if you remember, the last special election we had in Illinois was the race to fill Rahm's old seat up in the 5th District. And it was the first election I ever covered. And there were, I think, more than 20 candidates in the race. I remember going to do a debate. There were 17 people on the stage. There were aldermen, state lawmakers, people I'd never heard of before. And the party couldn't slate a candidate. So hopefully, I think they're hoping to winnow the field a little bit here, but who knows what they're going to do when they get together.
Well, it would be kind of like those early mayoral debates, too, the last session,
right,
where the guy who, of course, was going to be mayor didn't bother to even go to those debates, because why? He knew he was going to be mayor. So.
Right. Mel Reynolds has said he's not seeking the party's endorsement, so there's one less person to worry about on December 15th.
But, I mean, I think to be kind of serious about it, there are some very serious concerns in the African-American community that there are a lot of black candidates running who could split the black vote because the way the district has been reworked, it's now what, about 50% white, 50% black.
It's about 53% white now, 30s and Hispanic, I think, and then other part of the white population. But I think that's really the interesting story here is about black political power. And you saw as soon as Debbie Halverson, former Congresswoman Debbie Halverson, she tossed her hat into the race. As far as I know, she's the only white candidate who's officially jumped in. right now. And you saw, I interviewed Kwame Raoul the day she announced, and he's sort of positioned himself as a power broker to try to anoint some black candidate to not split the black vote. And he was saying, you know, she lost dismally when she ran against Jesse Jackson. What the heck is she doing trying to run again? But, you know, the Politico had a great story about this the other day, that she says she's not trying to take advantage of this. But if there's, you know, 10 or 15 African-American candidates who have solid credentials, and then there's her, and if we want to go on the old knowledge that everybody will vote their race, it'll be an interesting thing to see how black political leaders attack this problem, if they think it's a problem.
Well, I think it says a lot more about the voters themselves, you know, and the guy who's missing in all this conversation is Jesse himself. You know, what bullet did he dodge? I'd still like to know. And ultimately, what will happen to him? You know, there's still the federal investigation. There's the rumors that, you know, that he essentially gave up so that they wouldn't prosecute him. So is he just going to go back to South Shore and retire? I mean, what's going to happen with him and the legacy of their family? You know, because who's next? You know, Sandy was missing from the city council on the city budget vote.
On nothing less than the budget vote, right?
You know, so I agree. I think the question is more about the black political power. You know, the person who ends up filling that seat may not be one of these people, one of these names already. They may have already decided. But it'll be really interesting to see how it shakes out.
And really a challenge to choose a new African-American political leader, kind of a next generation. We have two African-Americans in Illinois' congressional delegation. They're both older gentlemen, Bobby Rush and Danny Davis. And you have the last three people who've held the seat have now gone out in scandal. Gus Savage with his sex scandal, then Mel Reynolds, of course, with his sex scandal, and then his financial and campaign finance scandal, and then, of course, Jesse Jackson Jr. So I feel like there's some pressure here on the community. Let's pick someone. Let's find someone. Let's
get
bring
someone
the
who's not a part of any of this.
Right.
I did want to mention too that we were joking a little bit about Michael Sneed, but I gotta say that one of the things that I just thought was really disgraceful was that on our show, we kicked around the whole, $40,000 Rolex thing, which of course was a Michael Sneed story, and it just went huge. I mean, it became a national story, global story. BBC was reporting on it. And then 8 days later, just buried off in a little parenthetical remark in another story in Sneed was, oh, and by the way, my sources tell me that that it was not for a female friend. So, you know, I find that really amazing, like to sort of, torturously paraphrase the other situation. Where does Jesse Jackson go to get his reputation back about at least that? Because that will be, that'll be in his epitaph, that he bought a $40,000 Rolex for a lady friend. Well, apparently he didn't. So at least this show will correct that we were sort of making fun of him for that, and we were wrong, and we had one source on that, just like Mike Sneed probably had. So
I didn't have those sources, so
yeah.
I think we unfortunately have too short of a memory, and it won't take too much for Jesse Jackson Jr. to rebuild whatever reputation he needs for his next chapter. I mean, he's clearly not going back to Washington, but I don't think that he's done. It's just a matter of what will he end up facing in terms of prosecution or actual charges,
or jail time.
I mean, and if the real issue here is that he was using campaign funds for home improvements, I mean, that's just galactically stupid.
Yeah.
You can. There are other ways to illegitimately finance your home improvements than using your campaign. Funds for that.
It belittles it in a lot of ways, but it reminds me so much of the building inspector who gets 30 years in jail for taking $500.
Sure.
I mean, it's sort of like, really?
Right.
That
tax evasion. Al Capone.
That's what's gonna take you down, is that you bought some paint and drywall or something for your, well, anyway.
But not a Rolex.
But not a Rolex, or maybe a Rolex, but not for a lady friend, or so. All right, enough of this. Rebecca, the other big story I think we've been looking at, and you've been covering this a lot, is Barbara Byrd-Bennett, who I think, at least on the surface, would seem to be a big winner this week. She proposed this, hey, give me a little time to get public input into the school closing process, and if the legislature will give me that, then we'll give you 5 years of moratorium on. I think we all kind of know that. Well, that kind of happened, but it's not. I don't think it's quite what it looks like, is it?
Well, it's really a very savvy move by CPS and by Mayor Emanuel to offer to the community the idea of getting all the school closures done in one round this year. They'll delay it till the end of March, so there'll be less time for organized opposition to come out. And it'll be over and done with by the time that Mayor Rahm Emanuel is seeking re-election. And what's more, they're keeping the right to turn schools around. It's also unclear the extent to which they might do other school reform measures like phase-outs or turnarounds in the future, even if they don't close any more schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that to me is the, the really interesting part about this is, yeah, we're not going to close any schools for 5 years, except the ones we close. Because we will be able to close them for academic reasons, right? So the moratorium is only for
It's actually a little
overcrowding?
unclear at this point. We
Okay.
know for sure there will be a moratorium on future closures for underutilized schools. And there's also people coming out and contesting even the district's formula for what it means if a school is underutilized. So it'll be really interesting to see once we do get some more detail about which schools they're looking at, what the reality is on the ground in those schools.
And one of the things that has been a real concern is that, okay, yes, population has been going down in Chicago, there's no question about that, but it hasn't been going down at this rate. The reason that there are so many empty seats in these schools largely is because they've been opening a lot of alternative schools, a lot of charters or whatever, and draining people out of these sort of classic schools,
yes
right?
and no. I mean, there are also neighborhoods where the schools are extremely overcrowded. So it's not just a population loss problem, it's a population shift problem, and that the African American neighborhoods have been losing population, whereas in the Latino neighborhoods, the population has been booming, and in many cases, schools are overcrowded. So part of the reason they've had to keep opening new schools has been to alleviate overcrowding in some neighborhoods. And so that's part of the issue here too.
So they'll open a new school, and the old schools with the declining population, nobody wants to close them, so they just kind of sit there with 100 kids in them or something like that.
And that's what's been happening so far, yeah.
So this is a really interesting dynamic that they have to face, because they do have to, I think everyone agrees, they do have to do some closing, right? I mean, you would agree with that assessment?
It seems like it, although it's a complex issue because the amount of the money they will save through the closings is a very small chunk of their budget deficit going forward.
Like $500,000 a school or something?
Exactly. It could be, if they closed 100 schools, $50 to $80 million. And when you're looking at $1 billion budget deficit, that comes to seem like a paltry amount.
Right.
So.
And I know that we always hear these horror stories about how, my kids can only go to that school because if they have to go 5 or 6 blocks away, gang territories.
They could still turn around schools, right?
Yes.
Under this, they would still be allowed to turn
They'd
around
still be able to
schools.
turn around schools, yeah.
Which is not the same thing as closing a school, but you fire everybody and start over.
Yeah, unless you're a teacher, then it feels like
Then it feels
mighty
like
like
the school.
closing a school,
It
right?
does feel kind of like that, yeah. Or unless you're the CTU or something, I don't know. So, I mean, is this a big win for Rahm Emanuel and for Barbara Byrd-Bennett?
It's really a savvy move on their part, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what the Chicago Teachers Union comes up with next, because, right now it does seem like CPS has a bit of a strategic advantage just in terms of having gotten this extension, being able to get the closures done with in this year, and also really coming out and saying that they want community engagement, and that the reason for the delay is that they want to be able to get more.
Do you, forgive me if I'm putting you on the spot, you can just,
Sure.
refuse to answer this, but do you believe that? Do you really believe that it's an effort to get greater community engagement? I mean, haven't they already picked out these schools and this is just a gigantic PR move?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
I don't know their intentions. I mean, I can certainly understand that it looks suspicious to many folks, but I can't speak to their intentions. It does seem like they may be trying to make an effort to rebuild the trust that's been lost over the years which has been a huge problem for CPS. The loss of trust from the community.
I think the trust is gone.
Yeah.
I mean, on the part of the community, and you know what you see when you have a 7-day strike is that where's the kids? You know, where are the kids? Where's the conversation on the actual education? You know, undercrowded schools, that's a problem. You know, that means a higher student-to-teacher ratio. You know, so perhaps it's not a matter of closing some schools. Underperforming schools need to be addressed, absolutely. But perhaps it is saying, hey, you know what, we're going to find a way to get you through those 3 gang territories to that school where you can actually like talk to your teacher. You know, instead of having a playground or a you know, more of a relationship where the teacher feels like they're herding cats, you know, and not teaching because they have to keep kids under control.
Yeah.
But it's been a boon for charter schools, for charter school networks. UNO has just built a new school, you know, specifically to address the overcrowding. And the problem that you end up having is, you know, all of these populations shift and will continue to shift. And so whatever school closings happen now may not be effective 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when the communities have moved into other neighborhoods. You look at Pilsen right now, you look at Little Village, you look at Humboldt Park. They are changing rapidly. You know, there's a lot fewer kids in Pilsen today than there were 10 years ago, a lot fewer. And so to me, it's I don't understand the motive either, because it's like you're talking about addressing a problem now, but you're setting up the opportunity to fix it in 5 years when the dynamics are a lot more complicated than closing a school or turning around one school.
So are you saying that you think that it isn't necessary to close as many schools, that the end result, the end benefit of it is not that great? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think about it as a young urban professional in the city of Chicago who wants to have kids. That's how I look at it now, right? And so I try to take myself out of the journalism role and say, do I want to be jerked around by a system that's going to force me 4 years prior to even having the kid to figure out the quantum mechanics involved in the magnet school placement or possibility? I didn't do well in physics. You know, or do I want to go to a charter school, or do I want to go to a private school, or do I want to leave the city? And that's not the kind of thinking that you want parents, future parents, young people in the city. Ram's bringing all this business back and bringing young professionals back to the city from the suburbs. That's not the kind of thinking I would assume you want, you know, because kids are your most valuable resource. And if the city schools are not seen as a place where you can educate the vast majority of them, then you have a serious problem, a long-term problem.
So, I mean, in the sort of the panorama of all the issues and problems that the Chicago Public Schools is facing right now, is underutilized schools in the top 10 of their problems?
You know, that's hard to say, but it does certainly seem like by consolidating schools, they will be able to save a fair chunk of money in the long run. Although in some districts have actually found that closures can cost money or can save less money than they anticipate. And the other issue is that school resources could potentially be used more effectively when in schools that are larger. Students could be offered better selection of courses. Potentially there could be less having to split grades and combine multiple grades into one classroom.
But then you also have this thing, which is, you know, it's just kind of human nature. We want the school to be a block away from our house, right?
Which makes perfect sense,
we
too.
don't want our kids to have to go.
And if you put it off for 5 years, I ask this out of ignorance, are you just delaying another huge round of school closures 5 years from now when populations shift? Or is that not how it
you're
works?
Totally passing the buck. Because 5 years from now, there's Snead sources already talking about Rahm making a run for the White House. So, you know, to me, that 5 years is like, that's a promise you're not going to even be expected to keep.
Well,
you know,
what everyone I'm talking to is guessing is that it will just be a massive round of school closings this year. So, I mean, in
get
theory,
ready for it.
Yeah, in theory, if they close enough schools this year, I mean, they might not need to do it again in 5 years.
So that may be the reason that they're willing to do the 5 years,
Right,
is that they're just going to get it all over with. And, and I think it was Ben Joravsky this morning said that Mayor Emanuel has done some polling and finds that it polls well in Virginia.
Why?
If he goes after all those union people
Right.
and everything. So that's going to be important to him in his presidential run. But we kid the mayor. So what else you want to talk about? What else is going on?
Well, let's talk about the media. Let's talk about DNA Info. You brought it up.
Yeah,
at the
okay,
lead,
DNA
so-
Info, yes, yeah. They started today. They've been out. Not today. It started this week, and my own impression is that they started very strong. A couple of really good stories, right?
Yeah, I think that they had a Ted Cox, a former Daily Herald reporter, Southtown Star reporter, had a great story today about sort of what he portrayed as kind of the unsung heroes of Chicago's violence crisis, which were these EMTs and ambulance drivers who save. He ballparked, more than 1,000 people recently as they're on their way to the emergency room, which was a great story. They had that good story about campaign finance and Todd Stroger the other day. The question I have from a news consumer perspective is the mix of stories. As I was mentioning to you before the show, they also had a story about a charity run that would be run by, apparently based on the photo they had,
semi-naked men.
Semi-naked, very well sculpted men in Speedos over the weekend. So, if I'm going there for
Who
the
doesn't
ambulance
wanna see
story,
that?
I don't know that I'm going there for the guys in the Speedos story, but maybe I'm an odd news consumer. So it'll be interesting to see how they balance this hyper-local coverage with some of this more in-depth citywide stuff.
To me, it says a lot about the metrics, which I think are still being sorted out from a newsonomics, point of view, which is, Ricketts is clearly not, doing this on a shoestring. He's got resources to
money.
burn,
Yeah.
but big staff. I mean,
They rated
Pulitzer
the
winners. I mean,
not once, not twice, but 3 times.
yeah. But you've also had some departures.
Right,
People prior to the launch leaving, going back to the Sun-Times, going to other areas.
Right.
From just a pure monetization standpoint, I don't see it. I just don't see it, and I think that
No, I mean the economic model appears to be have a rich guy who runs it.
Right.
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 I mean, that,
right, and
that's a great model for
do some great journalism,
newspapering.
buffered by some page view bait. But other than that, I mean, it's a crowded field. It's a crowded field. Exclusives are not what they used to be, where the Sun-Times would beat up the Tribune with a front page Sunday, and the Tribune's got to chase it on Monday. Exclusive lasts about all of 45 seconds. The window of a retweet.
And now they just link to each other anyway.
Yeah,
So,
so I think it's a noble experiment, but I wonder in a post-patch, post-Gatehouse Media, post-hyper-local, trib-local world, just the metrics of monetizing that much staff, good staff.
Well,
how do you do it?
It is interesting because your parent company just got a $200,000 grant, I believe, right, for the Reporter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the Chicago Reporter just got it.
So I mean, but the Reporter and Catalyst, you guys depend. It's almost the same thing. You depend on getting some nice infusions of cash once in a while. So it almost does seem like if we really want to keep getting news, we just have to have people with money who are willing to give it to these organizations. And I mean, look at our friends, the Sun-Times. Michael Farrow, who essentially leveraged and bought the Sun-Times. That's an exaggeration, but is the big guy at the Sun-Times. And we have Obitgate that happened the other day, where a gentleman named David Spear, who is the head of ITW, and just happened to be the guy who bought Michael Farrow's company, Click Commerce, for $292 million. So they too have a nice connection. And he just dictates that when Michael Farrow passed away, he would be the front page story in the Sun-Times. Now, I don't think that's journalism, and I don't know if any of you guys do, but that strikes me as a real problem.
I don't know. I don't have the inside track on whether Farrow ordered this to happen. I don't have those sources. But
Peter says he did.
Right. But what I'm saying, what I do know is that when I got this news alert, I think on Sunday is when this gentleman passed away. I felt like the stupidest reporter in all of Chicago because I was like, who is Spear? I had no idea who this guy was.
I'm so happy to hear you say that because I got the same thing. The old phone buzzes and it's like Sun-Times alert. David Spear has died. It's like, I know I should know who that is, but
But even then, I saw the name of the company. I'm like,
Right.
I'm not. Maybe it's because I'm not a business reporter. And I
Right.
wanted to text one of my reporter buddies, but
Right.
then I felt too stupid, so I didn't text him because I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
So if that's any indication of pushing it up, I had never heard of
But
it
I mean,
until then.
again, we're making light of this, but we're about to see this happen to the Tribune too, right? I mean,
We could.
We
I
know
mean-
the Tribune company is gonna divest itself of the newspapers, and you could probably pick up the Tribune for about what, 200 million, 250 right now.
With some tax liabilities. I mean, I
Yeah.
think one of the most important things to keeping the company whole was the FCC softening its stance on cross ownership.
Right, right.
Had that not been the case, I think it's fair to say that it would have been very dark days and very quick days, and December 12th is right around the corner.
Yeah.
For the publishing portions of the company,
Of
there's
which you are a part.
of which I am a part. Yes, always owned by the Tribune Company. I think the LA Times, and I don't have an inside baseball. Trust me, I'm trying to figure it out. But I think the LA Times is an appealing asset from the perspective of being geographically located in the center of the world's biggest egos and biggest pocketbooks. So I'm sure there are a couple of people in Hollywood who would love nothing more than to
Who
control
did
the LA
trinket.
Times.
Wonderful
Have some fun.
trinket, right.
I mean, I don't see it as Obitgate in the sense that what you consider news is different from what I might consider news, and some would say that if Spear hadn't bought Click Commerce, then who would Michael Farrow be? And if
And would the
Michael
Sun-Times
Farrow
even
wasn't
exist today?
exactly,
It
and
might
so,
not even be here. Right.
So I think that what it does do though is it does raise the specter of undue influence and improper influence in the news process, and it's not subtle.
Not that that's new or anything.
Well, exactly, and I prior to the show we were talking about the Colonel
Yeah.
and his famous influence
Right.
that he would wield at every corner and every way at the
Yeah.
Tribune
Yeah.
against presidents, and it really massaged popular opinion not by
Yeah.
locating a relatively unknown person on the front page, but by trying to steer the national dialogue.
Yeah, we are coming toward the end of our little program here. We've got the new CTA budget. We've got new fare structures at the CTA. Anybody want to tackle that for like 1 minute? It strikes me that it actually was a pretty clever move.
I would like to. I'm from Maryland. I grew up in the suburbs of Washington D.C. and I rode the Metro. And as anybody who knows, it's a billion times quieter than the CTA, and it's also about 10 times more expensive.
Right.
I don't know how much longer in this epic era of crushing, whether it's CPS, whether it's state, whether it's the city,
Pensions.
just crushing fiscal problems. The CTA is still affordable. And as long as it is, it still works and it's on time. And I just wonder how much longer you can be able to ride the train and have one fare to cross the city, to change lines.
Right. Howard to 95th Street.
Yeah,
is
I mean, it's totally
yeah.
plausible to say, no, it's going to be double that. It could cost double or triple that.
Well, I thought it was a great idea to raise the thing to $5 for tourists coming in. Anyway, we've done it. We've wasted the entire 28 minutes and 30 seconds on all this stuff. We haven't wasted it. Thank you, Al. Thanks for coming. I hope you'll join us again sometime. Al Keefe from WBEZ, Fernando Diaz from OI, and of course Rebecca Harris from Catalyst. It was great having you all here. Thanks for watching. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can see us right here on cable and right here at this address. You can watch us any old time you want and check us out on iTunes. Please, we really hope you will. We'll see you next week. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching Chicago Newsroom. Bye.